Hello, I'm Matthew Jarron, Museum Curator at the University of Dundee, and welcome to the second in a series of short films in which I talk about various different aspects of the University Museum collections. And today we're going to be looking at some of the art and design pieces that we have from the early years of the art school, what we now know of as Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design. Now, it was only when the college moved to its current home in Perth Road in the 1950s that the college collection as we know it was born. Alberto Morocco, who had just recently taken over as head of drawing and painting, started to acquire works from students at the annual diploma shows from 1955. So we have a very good collection of student work from that point on. Before that, the only sort of very sporadically acquired things, and we've been gifted various other things since then. So it's in a sense rather harder to piece together the history, but that's really what I'm going to try and do today. Now, the art school began as part of a wider organisation called Dundee Technical Institute, which was founded in 1888. And art was taught there from the start by a chap called George Malcolm. But it was very much things like perspective and architectural plans, engineering drawings, very much reflecting the kind of students that they had in the Technical Institute and the sort of needs that they would have. And it was only in 1892 when this chap, Thomas Delgatti Dunn, becomes art master at the Technical Institute. And he vastly increases the available subjects that were taught. So first of all, he introduces day class as well as evening classes, and he broadens out the curriculum quite substantially. Now, the syllabus that Dunn would have been teaching at the time was based on what was known as the South Kensington system. This was the standard form of art education throughout the UK at that time. And it was run by a department in London called the Science and Art Department, based in South Kensington, and was largely based on figure drawing, and in particular on endlessly drawing from classical casts. And of course we still have some of those original casts in the Art College to this day. And the only pieces that we have from the 1890s that survive in the college today are these two drawings. These were done by a student called Dunn, possibly a relative of Delgatti Dunn, not sure. We don't know his first name or her first name. And this is fairly standard South Kensington stuff. So you would take the form of one of these classical casts, in this case the discus thrower, and you would then have to fill in all of the anatomical details. So in this case it's the skeleton, and in this case it's all of the muscles. You know, students at that time had to have a really detailed anatomical knowledge. Now, the vast majority of stuff was sent off down to South Kensington, and as far as I know, none of it ever actually came back again. And so that's why we have so few pieces from this period, because we just never retained it in the first place. And the reason that we have these two particular pieces is they actually both seem to fail. They're both stamped work not accepted for certificate. Now, whether that's because they weren't good enough, or whether maybe they just arrived late, or there was some other thing in which they failed to qualify, I don't know. I mean, they certainly seem very detailed and extraordinarily good quality looking at them today, but obviously we're looking at them from very different eyes, and we don't know exactly what the judges were looking for. But anyway, they obviously got sent back, and so we still have these two pieces today. However, we do thankfully have quite a few photographs of other student work that was produced at this time. So we are able to see some of the other things that were done. So some beautiful jewellery here. We have examples of textile design. We have example of wallpaper design. And as well as the photographs that Delgatti Dunn kept of student work, we also start to see students' work appearing in The Studio, which was the leading art magazine in Britain at the time. They quite often published examples of particularly outstanding student work from various art colleges around Britain. And from the 1890s we start to see Dundee student work appearing in this. So here's some furniture designs, for example. So as you can see, very much design-based work, and there isn't really very much fine art, it's all very much design. And the reason for that is that the Technical Institute was not the only art school in Dundee at the end of the 19th century. There were actually a whole load of different art schools at the time. And the reason for that was that from the 1850s onwards, the government started awarding grants for local authorities to set up, and individuals to set up art schools. And basically I think they paid something like 50% of the costs. And so that led to a whole surge of art schools appearing over the next few decades. And Dundee was no exception. So, for example, Broughty Ferry had its own art school, Lochee had its own art school, there was the Central School of Art in the Nethergate, but the main one was the Dundee School of Art, which was based in the High School and which was founded in 1856. So it was the first art school in Dundee, and it was really the main place for art education for the whole of the rest of the 19th century. So it was where all of the leading Dundee painters that emerged in the latter part of the 19th century all studied at the Dundee School of Art, including John Duncan, Stuart Carmichael, George Dutch Davidson, David Foggy. All of these various artists were all studying at the Dundee School of Art. And then in 1901, there was a big nationwide review of art education by what was then called the Scotch Education Department. And that led to the establishment of 4 what were called central institutions of art and design, one in each of the 4 Scottish cities. And in Dundee, it was the Technical Institute that was deemed to be the central institution. And all of the other art schools in the city were closed down or merged with the Technical Institute. Now, of course, that had the result that the Technical Institute immediately had a huge surge in student numbers and very quickly became overcrowded. And so in 1908, they started to fundraise for a new, larger building in the centre of town. And that's ultimately where they moved in 1910, down to this new building on Bell Street, which of course is now part of Abertay University. And this gave them much larger premises. And it's also notable that they, at that time, renamed the institution Dundee Technical College and School of Art, because art had become such a significant part of the curriculum at that time. As well as having more space, there were also new staff brought in, most notably John Milne Purvis, who you see here as head of a separate department of drawing and painting. And various other people here. So here's Perry Hill, who's teaching design, J.M. Moyes, who's teaching both art and design. And we have some work by the staff. So here's a study that John Milne Purvis did. He was very keen on travelling to the Middle East and North Africa. So here's a painting that he did in Constantinople of Santa Sophia in 1912. J.M. Moyes, we have this nice etching by him of Glen Nevis. Now, we don't know exactly when this is, we think probably the 1920s, but coincidentally, we just recently acquired this lovely woodblock print by Thomas Delgatti Dunn, also of Glen Nevis, in 1923, which makes me wonder whether maybe the two of them went off on a sketching expedition together, possibly. In terms of student work, we don't have a huge amount, but we do have some interesting pieces. So this is a life drawing by a student called Agnes Payton. She did it in 1913, but she actually gave this to us in 2001 at the age of 106. She was at the time the oldest surviving alumna of the art college. Quite amazing. We have a few pieces by a student at the same time called Margaret Lomond. This is a nice watercolour of one of the studios looking out into the corridor, and in fact this cast of Venus we actually still have in the fine art corridor. Sort of lost her limbs, unfortunately, but she's still there. We have various other pieces by Margaret Lomond. So here's a still life painting, for example, a design exercise. This one, I don't know whether it's just unfinished or whether it's deliberately been left like that to show the process, I'm not really sure. But I imagine these would all be standard exercises that they all had to do. Now, just as the art school was midway through its move to Bell Street, they were busy getting their new facilities set up, appointing their new staff, suddenly out of the blue came this extraordinary bequest from a local businessman, James Duncan of Jordanstone. But that is a whole other story, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to pause, we'll say end of part 1, and I'll invite you to come back soon and find out the rest of the story in part 2. Bye for now.